Okay, let's turn to our next session now, which is entitled Investing in Future-Ready Education. In this discussion, we aim to launch a dialogue that taps into the brains of educational investors and educators. And I should bring on stage to introduce his guests, the moderator for this panel. He is the head of China and APAC for Startup Grind. He is Jan Schmekel. Please welcome Jan Schmekel on stage with his guests.
We have the rest stuck in the backstage. Well, thank you very much for having us. Good morning once again. And today, or in this panel, we are going to be talking about edtech from the perspective of investors, because we have distinguished panel of investors here. And I just want to say at the beginning that we have heard a lot about how technology is changing education, the landscape for both teachers and learners. And that's what we are going to explore, because there is a lot of opportunities that are tied to those challenges that we have heard so much about. And before we start, I just want you to join me in welcoming our guests here. Here, first of all, we have Matt Greenfield from Rethink Education. So please, can we give him a hand as well? Then we have Stanley Bucheski from the EdTech Fund. Thank you for joining us. Also, we have Sandeep Murthy from the Lightbox Ventures, I suppose. Thank you. And also, last but not least, we have Koichi Saito from KK Fund. So we have this panel from basically all around the world, because some guests came from the US, some from Singapore and India. So I suppose it's going to be very, very interesting discussion. And before we get started, I just want to do some housekeeping, because as you know, you can also ask questions, because we want to make this panel a little bit more engaging. So if you have some questions to the panelists, please feel free to use the app or the website that you have been given. And we're going to look at those questions if we have some time during the panel or afterwards. And also, we have a pooling question at the beginning that I want you to take a moment to answer. Can we put it up? Because we are going to be talking about business models, and I think this question can actually give us some context. So if you could look into the app and just answer this question real quick, and we are going to circle back to that question later on when we are going to be talking about monetization and business models. But gentlemen, once again, thank you very much for joining us today. And I would like to start with self-introduction, so that people have some context what you do on a day-to-day basis and what your companies do. So Matt, can you please start? 30 seconds.
I'm the managing partner of Rethink Education, which makes venture investments in education companies focused on having a positive social impact, which is not all education companies. I'm a former literature professor and a public poet.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stanley Bucheski, founder of the EdTech Fund. We invest in seed-stage education technology companies focused on products that create greater student engagement, give teachers better insights into what students are learning, so formative assessment type products, and technology products that save teachers time. I had a 6-month departure at the beginning of this year to do some public service for the Trump administration as the interim CFO for the Department of Education. And we are now very focused on the Chinese market, starting a services company to bring education products to the Chinese market.
Thank you. We're definitely going to talk about China later on, so that's good that you brought it up. Sandeep?
I run a $150 million fund called Lightbox in India. We invest in consumer tech businesses and make only a limited number of investments. So we make 8 investments out of this fund, and interestingly, 2 of them have been in education. So I think the opportunity in education has been quite interesting in India, and I think the need is quite high, and so I'd love to talk about that. And I'm also on the board of an NGO called Magic Bus, which again is on education for underprivileged kids. So education has oddly found its way in many aspects of my life.
Thank you. Koichi?
Hi, my name is Koichi Saito from KK Fund. Very honored to be here today. Thank you very much for inviting. KK Fund is Singapore-based venture capital fund investing in early stage investment startups across Southeast Asia. So we have a wide range of the investment in the internet and mobile space. Very happy to share my thoughts today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So because you're all investors and you have invested in a bunch of edtech companies, and also the question that we are supposed to answer today is actually where the opportunities are in the next coming years. Can you start by talking a little bit about the deals that you have done recently, and also maybe some deals that you wish you could have been part of, but you weren't. So Matt, can you just start with a couple of those examples?
Yeah, so I'm always mindful of the immense amount of human suffering in the world, people suffering because of inadequate education. I want to respond to an earlier question about what one might do with $1 billion. And I think if one could spare just even $20 million to build an engaging app, a game, that could teach someone how to read without a teacher or a classroom, that would be transformational. As Dr. Tang was saying, there are something like, as of 2015, there were 781 million adult illiterates, and if you include their children, they're the largest nation on earth. They're a larger nation than China. And China had GDP growth of 6.7 last year, which is a lot higher than America's, which is fantastic. But wouldn't it be great if you could take the largest nation on earth, the nation of functional illiterates, and help them to double their GDP in a matter of a couple of years? And that's what that app could do. So if any of you know of an app like that, please tell me. I'm not sure, I'm not even sure whether it's a for-profit or a non-profit. So as the laureates both said, we do not want to invest in technologies that amplify the worst aspects of the current system. We are looking for applications that help prepare people for lives of purpose and meaning as citizens, as workers, and as family members and friends. I was talking last night to Stanley, who said, no, it's really just about the jobs. But I would disagree. I think that despite our disagreements on politics, we could both agree that most Americans, well, 26% of adult Americans can name all 3 branches of the American government, which means that very few of them understand what their rights are or what the structure of the government is. That's a tremendous failure for people who have mostly been in school for at least 13 years. How do we do a better job of that? Let me just briefly describe a couple of the companies we have invested in. A company called EverFi. EverFi is focused on teaching critical life skills that are often outside the curriculum to students. Skills like how to handle cyberbullying, financial literacy, how to avoid substance abuse. And they have an interesting business model in which they give the software for free to schools, and the only requirement is that the software get used, and they get paid by corporate sponsors like Major League Baseball and the National Basketball Association, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and so on. And with a new product focused on educating kids about the dangers of opioid abuse, they're getting paid by pharmaceutical companies to help address that current American crisis. That's one company. Another company, which you're going to hear a bit more about later, is Vocabulary. Alex Rappaport sitting there in the front. And what I will say is that a lot of venture capitalists think that content is dead. Or, Dr. Yidan alluded to the massive amount of content that is available for free. I think there is still a phenomenal market for content that is genuinely engaging and exciting for students, which most education content is not. And so when we see that genuine engagement and excitement, we have to honor it. Yeah. And then we have a fascinating workforce analytics company called Burning Glass Technologies. They have the best map of workforce skills, much better than, say, LinkedIn's. And they also know what a particular combination of skills is worth in a particular area. So let us say that your son or daughter is thinking about majoring in sociology, and you are thinking, well, it's wonderful that you are passionate about sociology, but what kind of living will you be able to make? Well, it would be nice to know what the jobs are in your region.
Yeah.
for someone with that major. But it would be even better if your child could be given a variety of suggestions. Take one accounting course, it raises your salary and increases your options in this way. Take these 4 courses in computer science and statistics, and together with the knowledge of constructing randomized controlled trials that you learned within the sociology major, you now qualify as an entry-level data scientist. You literally make twice as much as the business major. So that is a very powerful company that has formed partnerships with 4 other companies within our portfolio.
Got it.
We think that everyone in the workforce needs that data.
Thank you. Great. I also want to give some time to other panelists. Guys, what about you? And could you maybe like take it from the perspective, like where you see those other opportunities kind of emerging, like what you're looking at as an investor through the companies that you have invested already in, but also the companies that you're looking for?
Yeah, sure. So I first have to say I love the $1 billion question, and if I had $1 billion, I would spend it on meals for kids in school and transportation to get them there. That's easily half of the battle. As you may have guessed, Matt and I have been friends for a long time and have some lively conversations. The one on jobs is interesting because I think all of us in this room, we're fairly affluent, tiny part of the population, and so we all want our kids to be citizens of the world, right? That's why we're getting them this great education. But everybody else looks at their education and they say, okay, with this education, what job can I get? And that's been a major question that most parents in the US are asking themselves. Do I want to pay for my kid to go to college for 4 years and then end up answering the telephone somewhere out of 4 years of training? And the answer is obviously no. So they want an education that is directly tied to job skills. 2 areas that I think are really interesting right now are parent engagement and social emotional learning. Parent engagement, I think that we've talked a lot of the other speeches and panels have talked about parents. The number 1 factor in a kid's success in life is parental engagement. I've heard it said, if you want to be successful in life, choose very good parents. Unfortunately, that's not the reality. And the reality is that a lot of parents, they want to be engaged and help their kid in their education, but there's a literacy problem for a lot of parents, and so sending something home in the book bag that the parent's going to see, well, if they're only at the 4th, 5th grade level of literacy, they can't really impact that. And if they have English as a second language, they can't impact that either. So we're looking at a really interesting company that's addressing that issue right now. And then the second area is social emotional learning. I've heard a lot about that today and last night. I originally got in interest in social emotional learning when we tried to buy a small company that we were going to use to build an emergency response system for schools focused on active shooter in the building. And how is that related? Well, I started looking more in detail of, well, how could we prevent violence in schools? And realized that most violence in schools is by students or former students with mental health issues. Well, social emotional learning, I've started to sort of call surreptitious mental health. If you can teach a kid empathy, if you can teach a kid self-regulation, time management, and how to interact with other people and to ask for what they want, they're going to end up not acting that out in a violent way. But more importantly, it ends up helping them become more well-balanced, successful, and happy, and getting good grades and performing in school. So those are a couple of areas.
Yeah. So you are from the U.S. You both are from the U.S. You're based there, and then we have.
That's not a problem outside the U.S. Only in our barbarous nation.
And then we have representatives over there from Asia because Sandeep, you're based in India, right? And you invest into Indian startups.
Yep.
So is it different when it comes to the opportunities? What are some of those challenges that those companies that you invest in or you want to invest in are tackling?
Yeah, I think, look, one of the things we often find ourselves starting by explaining is that India is not the US and India is not China. And so it seems relatively obvious, but nonetheless,
very profound.
I think We often, I think, get told, look, this model worked there, this model worked here, therefore it should work there, therefore it should work there. And actually, everything we've seen that's tried that way just hasn't worked. And actually, quite honestly, the global players who do those businesses will come to India and do them at massive scale. We see that whether in e-commerce with Alibaba and Amazon, in transportation with Uber, in accommodation with Airbnb. So if you're going to solve answers that are generic to an extent, I think that those will be solved in a certain way. Now, India's got massive, unique problems, and I think those are what make it a very interesting market and an opportunity. And I think that the companies that are successful, and look, we don't have a mandate to invest in education specifically, yet in spite of that, we've made 2 investments in education. So I think either we're crazy or there actually are very interesting problems to be solved there, and unique approaches, because we don't have incumbents. We don't have great public school systems. We don't have, I was looking at it the other day, we apparently need 2 million teachers. I mean, you can put as many buildings as you want. I don't know how you find 2 million teachers very quickly to educate. I think every year we add 16 million odd kids to our population, and none of this is under control. So as a result, we're going to have this need on an ongoing basis. And I think the challenge with education, though, is that there are too many vested parties in the system. There are parents, there are educators, there's a government, and then there are employers. And to find a solution in a structure where there's already incumbents is very hard. In a structure where there aren't any. So, for example, we started in high-stakes test prep. Now, and I agree with Matt's point that amplifying some of the worst aspects of education is terrible, but look, we have a fiduciary responsibility to build businesses that make money and then see how we can extend that into other areas. And so, high-stakes test prep, people are willing to pay for. It's that IIT entrance exam, that bank exam, that some medical exam. So people pay for this stuff, so you know you can actually get a business going. Now, from that, we're trying to take that and extend it to K through 12 and actually look at how behavioral change can happen. So maybe I can subsidize part of what we're going to do elsewhere. But it's a challenging area. But because we are able to break through some of the vested interests there, it works for us. Similarly, we have an investment in early learning. So 2-year-old to 8-year-old kids. Here again, it's very unregulated. Parents are just looking for things to do for their kids. So we can get in with the product and we can see where we can go from there. I personally think the education investment cycle is going to be many, many, many years. And we're at the very start of understanding how we can perhaps figure out business models that make sense and kind of disrupt the existing cost structure. I'll just end with one part that actually you guys brought up yesterday, which was this idea of income sharing. And I thought that's amazing. I think these business model innovations where you can suddenly now look, I'm not going to charge you up front as a kid, I'm going to actually get paid on performance and delivering something. And I think markets like India, because we don't have historical legacy issues, are wide open to test these things in. And so that's
Great, thank you. We are definitely going to touch on the business models and stuff because I understand that you as investors, you need to make money because otherwise it's not going to work. So we are gonna get back to that. But Koichi, so you are investing in Southeast Asia, right? You're based out of Singapore and you're investing in Southeast Asia. When you compare those markets, because it's also very fragmented, right? Many countries and probably different customs when it comes to these things. So how do you see that?
So again, the Southeast Asia is totally different from the US and Japan and EU. We don't need a Google Glass. We don't need an Oculus, whatever. We are not looking at a cutting edge technology in the education space as well. So I think mindset of the people are very different. So I think people in the US and Japan and EU, I think education is investment. But for the Southeast Asian people, right, education is actually cost. So they don't want to pay money. So the B2C, business to consumer business is very, very hard to make money. So as an investor, actually, we are looking at now B2B or B2B2C. So for example, right, there is one company called Caliber in the Philippines. So they are providing a job matching platform. And then, so I think people in Southeast Asia and Philippines not many people cannot afford to go to the school, and even they go to school, it's very hard to get a job actually after the graduation. So that job matching platform actually providing the actually job training So such as coding, such as UI, UX design, and online marketing, and digital marketing, and communication skill. And then the company even provide a certification to the student. So the company is trying to trying to improve the skill set in the Southeast Asian student. But at the same time, they're trying to improve the job matching rate as well. So what I want to say here is they are trying to capture both two big markets. One is education, the other one is HR. So they are successfully making money from the business, which is HR. But at the same time, in the future, they have a potential to make money from the consumer side, which is a student or even university. So this company is addressing the real issue in Philippines, but currently successfully making money. So we are kind of looking at this kind of platform, B2B2C or B2B platform. So this is a huge potential in Southeast Asia.
Got it. There is one topic that you have mentioned a couple of times, which is China. And I'm passionate about the topic because I live in China, actually. I live in Shenzhen. I've been there for a couple of years, and I've seen how China is growing. And also, it's a known fact when you talk to people in China that parents in China, they would rather not eat but spend money on kids' education. And also, that's probably linked to the fact that China is the largest education market. There is a lot of online learners. How does this trend or fact influence your decisions or how you're looking at the education market as a whole?
I probably have less to say on that topic than anyone else on the panel, but I guess I'm here because we are looking for partnerships for our companies, possibly for investments, although we would need a local partner whom we trusted because we are certainly not experts on China. Yeah. There's an interesting difference between China and the US. I don't know if you noticed it, but we've mostly been talking with respect to the US, Stanley and I, about models that involve selling to institutions, schools, school districts, universities, and corporations and other employers, governments for the most part. That's not where the big companies are being built in China, and as Mr. Lau said earlier, they're interested in direct-to-consumer opportunities that tap into that willingness of Chinese parents to spend a significant percentage of their income on supplemental education. In the US, that does not exist to the same extent, except in my family. Very high percentage of my income.
Yeah, so I would say there are a few trends that really are driving dramatic change right now in China. Number one, English language learning is growing at 30% a year. I mean, just amazing. There are going to be more English speakers in China than the US in 5 years. So just think about that for a little while. And so the other thing is that there's a huge demand for Chinese parents sending their kids abroad to international university. And so a lot of the preparation that they're doing throughout their schooling is geared towards that. Something else happened, interestingly, with the ending of the one-child policy. The demand for preschool, sort of not quite overnight, but maybe a couple of years, sort of the demand for preschool has doubled. And preschool in China is this area of age 2 to 6 that is not like the age 6 and beyond, where the curriculum is regulated by the government. So that is very a small amount of regulation there. So when you look at all these factors together, there's just immense opportunity in China.
Guys over there, because you're representing Asia. What's the relationship there when it comes to China, maybe, or Chinese companies even entering your markets? Because that has been a trend, especially when you look at Southeast Asia, that big companies like Tencent, Alibaba, JD, all of these companies, they're trying to invest into companies in Southeast Asia or bring their business models or models into Southeast Asia. Is that happening in the education space as well, or not?
Okay, yeah. So as you know, the JD, Tencent, Alibaba, all of them are investing in Southeast Asia right now. but in the e-commerce space and finance and logistics. I think we are considering. I think the next big thing is healthcare and education from China. So I think 10 years ago, right, people say China is always copying a business model from the US, but now actually people in Southeast Asia are trying to copy Chinese business model because because it could be a great potential acquire. I mean, for the for the Southeast Asian startup. So we are copying from China and then try to sell the company to the Chinese people. So this is so before investing in the startup in Southeast Asia, as a VC, I'm always looking at what's going on in China. So we are heavily affected by China.
Yeah. What about you?
You know, so I've spent a lot of time here in Hong Kong talking to investors, and as a result, every time I say million about India, they say billion about China. And so you realize scale and order of magnitude is at a different level. And the one thing India does share in common, though, is a lot of people. And so as a result, I think there's a lot to be learned from how it's progressed in China, a lot to understand in terms of the cycles that companies will go through. And I think that, like I said, if you're in India especially, if you're building businesses that can very much have a global player enter. If you think about the large companies in the US and in China across industries, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, Google, Facebook, Amazon, these all come from very similar areas. Search, commerce, social networking. And then you can take devices, you can take Apple and Xiaomi. Now, outside of that, so those guys are going to come into India and they're going to do everything. In education, you're starting to see some very large Chinese companies emerge. And I think that's good and worrisome to an extent. Because as they get large, the opportunities in India, unless we understand unique elements, and I think one of the unique elements actually is, I'm not convinced 100% that education can move entirely unassisted online. I think that you'll need some offline intervention, you'll need some engagement. And so finding platforms that train the trainers and teach the people and scale that up in some way could hopefully provide unique opportunities for us to invest, and perhaps over time, as Koichi pointed out, get acquired if those businesses need to. But really, I think there's a lot to be learned from how they've addressed scale, and I think that that's kind of what we look at right now.
Yeah, and also the fact that we have so many smartphones out there, right? In China, even India, then you have access to those platforms and to the material and content that we already mentioned before. So I think that's fascinating that the price of those technologies is getting lower and lower every single day, basically. Yesterday, during the ceremony, there was one interesting point that was highlighted or brought up, was how we can use science to understand students and help them learn more efficiently. And also, of course, the same holds true on the side of teachers. And so we also had the conversation yesterday with Stanley. You mentioned that you want to talk about data, right? So now I want to give you a chance, and also a chance to all the other panelists. How do you look at this? How do you look at data? Do you actually, because everybody talks about data, big data, analytics, and stuff like that. Do all of your companies that you look at actually collect a lot of data and use the data? How do they use it? And what are the trends?
It's a whole new world with data right now. When you think about information that's historically been collected on paper that's now being collected digitally, there's a massive information that is being unused. And I really started becoming interested in data as it pertains to, let's call it formative assessment products, but really anything that a student is using either in the classroom or after school is information that the teacher can use to adjust their instruction. So the old school model really is that you sort of have to wait till the end of the semester test in some cases to realize what the student has not learned, and then it's too late. The ideal situation is to be able to use some of that data to say, okay, 10 of my students learned the subject well, 10 sort of got it, and 10 are struggling, and now we can break the classroom down into different small groups tomorrow, instead of letting that go by and then have 10 students that really didn't learn the building blocks. The other thing for data that I've been really focused on lately is how do we use all of these new sets of data to make correlations and conclusions about what and how to intervene in a child's life? And I started focusing on this when it came to preventing violence in schools. So you know, I can look at attendance. Did the child attend? Was the child late for school? A lot of schools are now tracking behavior, not only big major incidents, but on a regular basis, hourly basis, positive and negative behavior traits that they can just tap on their phone or on an iPad. There are things like, did I do my Dreambox, which is an after-school sort of math practice program? What time did I do it? How well did I do on it? Internet filters, was there a key word that was searched for that was blocked? And then you start putting all these things together and you get a better picture on a student's life. We're so far away from all of that right now, but that's the big opportunity in data that no one's really been able to put together. And I think you know, teachers are finding themselves with a very difficult job now that changes every single year. So data analysis is a key capability that they need to become expert in.
I think, sorry, I want to jump in because, you know, I'm interested in the India point of view right now because, you know, big country, right? The same holds true for China. So there is a big advantage when it comes to data, I suppose. Are you seeing that in the education space, Sandeep, or not at all?
So I think absolutely it's the only way through for us. So you think about how, what everybody looks for when they look to a school is what's the teacher to student ratio. So you're trying to get the lowest ratio and trying to figure out how does my child get as personalized an education as possible. And I think that data is the driver of that entire experience. And so ultimately, again, we've seen this in what we did in high stakes test prep, where we said, if I can learn enough about you and enough about you and enough about you, I can impact two parts in a test. One of these tests is really knowledge and behavior. And so if I can get enough information about both what you know and how you navigate a test, and I can influence these elements of it, I can really personalize the experience. Because the conventional way to do it is actually just to say, all right, here's a physics exam. You got question 12, 22, and 36 wrong. Go do more physics. Now, that doesn't really help. You just keep doing more and more and more and more. You're wasting time. Whereas if I can tell you that 12, 24, and 36 all correlate to the idea of force, and in force, it all has to do with acceleration, and therefore you need to go learn more about acceleration. And by the way, you shouldn't have jumped from physics to chemistry. You should have just stuck with it and then gone back to math later. And so there's all this stuff that now personalized actually makes an impact. And so within 10 exams of someone on the platform, we can deliver a 60% score improvement. And so that's because we can personalize it. That's all data. And now you take the fact that I said before, we need 2 million teachers. Where are we going to find 2 million teachers?
Yeah.
I think bots are going to be the answer in some way. And that's effectively going to deliver it in some mixed manner between physical and data-driven.
Got it. Do you want to add something? Do you have some points real quick? Because I would love to move to the business. And
just very quickly, it's a major investment theme for my firm. We are investors in data analytics companies, leading data analytics companies in both K-12 and higher ed. Each one has over 20% of US students on its platform, respectively. It's very hard to do serious analysis if you can't integrate the data from all of the different systems of record, which very few companies are able to do right now.
Got it.
Okay, I think Southeast Asia is a bit far from that level. But actually one university is trying to focus on the data after the graduation. So they think the paper certification degree it's getting useless because of in this environment. So they are also thinking about giving a certificate, over the blockchain, and then after that, they are strengthening the alumni network and using a tech, and they are trying to provide a continuous education, and then they try to, update their skill set in the blockchain, something like that.
Got it. So now it's time to talk about the business models, because it's actually tied to data, right? It can be one of the business models to use the data. Can we put the question that we asked at the beginning, because it was actually a question, what are the edtech products that you would like to pay for, or most likely pay for? Can we put it up, or it's impossible? It would be good to get like real-time feedback, and we can jump into it. So yeah, so it's adaptive learning teaching, AI VR, which is AI kind of related to data, the last question that we just talked about. What do you think about this? Just real quick, one by one, gentlemen, if you can comment on. Also, another one is massive open online process or processes. What do you think? Is it reflective of what's actually happening, what you're investing in, or it's different?
It's interesting that one of my firm's largest investment themes is totally missing from this list, which is administrative software. We have an investment in a K-12 budgeting software company, another one in a K-12 procurement software company, another one focused on K-12 scheduling, and then the two analytics companies, one in K-12 and one in higher ed that I mentioned. Those are not learning management systems. They are, in effect, deeper in the technology stack.
Yeah. Stanley?
Yeah, I'd kind of agree with that, actually. Some of the early on opportunities in education and technology in the US were similar to the dynamic you were discussing in India, where they were just brand new products. You didn't have to displace anybody. Now all the big education publishers, they've got hundreds of developers cranking on in-classroom technology products, but schools, they have a process for everything. And it's usually written down in a binder, sitting on a shelf somewhere. And so there's a big opportunity to take those processes and digitize them. I think AI and VR are incredibly interesting. I've started to wonder if anyone actually knows what AI is, and if you can answer what deep learning is, then you're on your way to saying yes to that.
I have the opposite point of view. I think that AI is becoming a pretty standard feature of almost every edtech product.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a very brief anecdote. There's a company that has a neat product that listens from the cell phone to conversation in the classroom, and then afterwards it tells the teacher, you were talking for 28% of the time, and 50% of your questions were open-ended and 50% were close-ended. Okay. And eventually it'll be able to distinguish the individual student voices and say, you keep neglecting Sammy. Now what's interesting about this company, and there's actually another one that has an almost identical product, is that it spent zero to develop the AI portion of its product. The founder was a Stanford student, and he just got free help from people elsewhere in the student body. The AI part is commoditized. It was the education part, the part that is addressing regulatory requirements and special needs, that still will preserve its value.
I think it's actually what you just mentioned, that AI is commoditized. I think that's, for example, what Alibaba is trying to do in China. They're just trying to leverage the Alibaba cloud and build a platform that anybody will be able to use AI and those like basic features, let's say, to kind of empower their businesses and stuff. So definitely that's true. What about India and Southeast Asia when it comes to the survey we just saw, or also the business models in general?
Yeah, no, I think first listening to your responses as well, budgeting's probably so far from relevant at scale in India, for example, right? So for us, when I look at this, I'm on the board of an NGO called Magic Bus, and we reach 350,000 kids a year, and we carry them from about age 12 till they get a job. And the programming and the content that we need for that is very different. And I think a lot of what was up there on MOOCs and this type of stuff, figuring out what the business model is, figuring out how to change the cost structure. So I think when we look at these spaces, whether it's retail, food, jewelry, we're trying to understand where is the cost structure being removed in the equation, and is the business model fundamentally changing? So I think MOOCs have a chance at removing a significant cost structure, taking out the rent, the real estate, the physical goods, and then can we evolve the business model to something freemium driven, something totally different? And can that apply at the lowest of levels? So I think, quite honestly, we get a lot of inspiration from what goes on the NGO side, because they've figured out how to do a lot with very little. And so if you can make that work, and you can figure that out at education, and then bring in the idea of data, scale, all of that, I think that's where innovations are going to come from that are relevant in our market right now. I do agree that data and AI and everything is going to be baked into that. But that's how we're looking at it right now.
Okay. Koichi.
Yeah, I think VR, AR stuff doesn't really fit the Southeast Asia. But even online learning still, as I said, B2C is very hard to make money. But I think for me, as an investor, we are looking at something education plus something, another industry. So it's like education plus real estate. We invest in a student accommodation online platform. And also education plus finance, student loan is horrible in Southeast Asia. There is a lack of the credit scoring data. So there is a huge, huge opportunity. And as I said, education plus HR, education plus media, or something like that. So currently at this stage in Southeast Asia, we are looking at those kind of combination, not purely online learning things.
Real quick, because we have like 5 minutes left, it was interesting that in terms of games, like nobody wants to pay, or very little percentage of people want to pay for gaming. But we have heard like Tencent, one of the biggest companies when it comes to gaming, and also Asia is kind of known that gaming is a big thing in general. Even Southeast Asia, India, I'm not sure, but in general in Asia, how do you look at gaming and education, real quick?
Well, something that is engaging to students, that pulls them through, especially in a collaborative learning environment, would be great. I just keep looking like Diogenes with his lantern for a good educational game, and I can't find one.
So that's the opportunity as well, maybe for Tencent.
I just find games to be very hard to scale, because a game in education, like Matt said, it's incredibly engaging, and the students love it. But you're continuously having to develop something new, and so I find it's challenging. What I have seen is that a lot of things like I was talking about, Raz Kids, Dreambox, some of these supplemental activities, they really are gamified, and so that's sort of becoming a
but they're not games that kids want to play voluntarily.
It depends on the age. I mean, it's hard to bring Mortal Kombat into the classroom.
No, I think one does learn a tremendous amount from playing a game like World of Warcraft or Minecraft.
Yeah, I'll tell you, my kids are addicted to Minecraft.
Yeah, it's just not easy to map onto the curriculum right now.
Yeah.
But I think gamification is getting used everywhere. I downloaded a meditation app the other day, and there was a leaderboard for it. Okay, I didn't quite understand how that worked. But I think principles of gamification are coming into all sorts of areas, and it'll take hold here as well.
I think as a function, it's fine. Like student competing with other student in some gaming contents. But I don't think, especially the parents doesn't want to pay for the gaming stuff.
Interesting. I actually wanted to ask some questions. I wanted to have audience asking some questions, but I just realized that I don't have the iPad here, so I cannot see the questions. If somebody submitted, I'm sorry about that. But I guess you guys are going to stick around so people can approach you one by one if they have some questions. But because we are coming to an end, I have a couple of questions that are pretty much general, but I want to ask you, because you are all in education space, edtech space, if you were about to pick, or if you should pick one skill that the students or teachers should focus on right now that is going to be relevant in the future, or like that is going to be really, really important for the future, for their future, what would it be? Matt?
Well, I think creative problem solving is very important, but I think the skill that we need most to cultivate in our students is empathy, as Dr. Colbert said earlier.
Empathy?
Yeah, I love that answer for students. For teachers, I would say data analysis. There's so much new data out there. They've got to figure out how to use it effectively to change their instruction on a daily basis.
Data as a prod to empathy.
So I think given the rate of change in the world, I think a willingness to take risk and fail and encourage failure.
Okay.
I think for teacher, one data analytics skill, but also
data analytics,
especially in Asia, the teacher gives only instruction. It's one way, so the teacher should be good facilitator especially in Asia, like make a discussion more.
Okay. Do you have any closing remarks? 1 minute left. You want to say something, guys? I will give you this time.
I'm going to revise my answer and say design thinking.
Design thinking.
Which combines problem solving and empathy.
Okay. Anything from your side, gentlemen?
No.
No. First of all, I guess I would just say, I think it's a great initiative, and the fact that we have global players and participants here really opened my eyes to some of the things they were talking about yesterday in terms of new models and new approaches. And I would hope that this type of a conversation would encourage the types of new ideas to come out and maybe partnerships across countries to work. So.
Yeah. Koichi?
Yeah, I think we are living at information age right now, so I believe we can solve the education problem by internet and tech. So I hope we're gonna invest in that kind of great company in the future.
Okay. Well, we are right on time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attention. And hope you're gonna enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
So thank you very much to Jan and his guests. That's Matt Greenfield, Managing Partner of Rethink Education, Stanley Buczewski, Partner and Founder, EdTech Fund, Sandeep Murthy, Partner at Lightbox, and Koichi Sato, Founder and General Partner of KK Fund. And to Jan Schmekel, Head of China and APAC Startup Grind, for his moderation of that session.